welcome to Team Performance Coaching. My name is David Hopper, and today I am with Greg Curtis, really good friend of mine. I'm excited that he's here. He is like the guru on assimilation. But before we get into that, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Tell me about myself. Okay, so David had asked me to share a little bit about my story, and I grew up in a very traditional, actually historical Baptist church in Los Angeles. I'm a third generation SoCal, and when I was 14, we moved to Orange County and visited a church called Eastside Christian Church. And it was the third church we visited, and man, the music was cutting edge even in the late 70s, if that dates me appropriately.
Cutting edge meaning?
Like it was awesome. Like it was really good.
Tell me 70s cutting edge, what is that?
They had a Fender Rhodes electric piano, they had drums, bass, guitar. You know what I mean?
That is cutting edge.
That was not in the 70s. And then when people got baptized, they cheered, and I thought, okay, this is not right. This is not good. Because I just, is that loud? You know, I just didn't.
So they were way ahead of the time.
And they were doing sermon series, which the way I grew up, I didn't even know it was the first sermon I ever understood that day. It was Jonah chapter 1 on a series on running from God.
And this is Eastside down the street or Eastside somewhere else at this point?
No, this was Eastside in its location for 50 years at the end of Yorba Linda Boulevard here in Fullerton. That's where it was forever.
Okay.
And I didn't know you were supposed to understand a sermon. I just thought you got credit for enduring them.
Yeah.
And so here I understood this thing, and my parents said, "Do you want to come back?" And I said, "Well, let's finish the series. I don't know all the clapping and the cheering when people are back, but I'm 14. How did I get that way?"
Yeah.
But anyway, so of course we were hooked, and it was the church was about 800 people then, and we had about 35 high schoolers in a trailer out in the parking lot. And by the time I graduated from high school 4 years later, we were 2,200 and had 600 people gathering on Wednesday nights.
All because of your high school group.
It was the high school group. Yeah, I mean, Les Christie, for those who know youth specialties, was my youth pastor.
So there was 2,200 going to high school?
No. The church had gone from 800 to 2,200. And the youth group went from 35 kids in a trailer to 600 on Wednesday night.
And it was Les Christie. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yeah, he was my youth pastor. He's the one. He's kind of responsible for me being here right now. So
I'm familiar.
If your gag reflex gets ignited by the things I shared today, you could just send Les a strongly worded email.
Yeah.
But anyway, so seeing what I saw life change happen at such close range that it redirected my career path. I articulated a calling to ministry, and went and got a degree in church growth and all stuff, and then Eastside was starting the second of 6 daughter churches. And
what year is this?
This would have been 1985.
85, and they were planting 6 churches.
Over time they had done 6 churches. We were the second of that 6. And we were in Yorba Linda, here where your church is. And so we started that church, and I was there for 27 years. The last 17 of the 27, I was the lead pastor.
Wow.
And I learned a lot about connecting with people. That's always been my passion and all that stuff there. And then towards the end of the 27 years, we were having facility issues. We just needed a new facility. And we had made 4 offers on property. None of them had worked out. Gene Apple, he was a preaching intern when I was a high schooler at Eastside. And he came and lived in my house for part of that internship. So I've known him forever. And he had come back to Eastside 3 years prior, and it was starting to grow to the point that they had outgrown their facility expansion plans and just had to move to a location between our 2 facilities.
Okay.
So there's a great, long, incredible God goosebump story, but I'll just say that we had this conversation, and with their facility issues and ours, we ended up re-merging the churches after 27 years at the new location between the 2. We bought the old Boeing plant.
So it was still both Eastside, but 2 different campuses.
No. We were a daughter church. Eastside, not Dutch.
Totally.
Yeah, we were a daughter church from '85. They weren't really doing campuses, I don't think, in '85. But
okay, gotcha.
Yeah, it was daughter church. We were an independent church. Most of my people didn't know Eastside from a hole in the wall.
And so you re-merged, even though your people didn't really even know that you were re-merging.
Very successful merge. 84% of my church is still there. We merged in November of 2012. So as of today, it's been a little over 7 years. 84% of my church is still there, and almost all the ones that aren't retired moved out of state and come back and visit when they're in town.
That's great.
So very successful merge, and that's how I ended up back at Eastside.
And my guess is the way you assimilate is it probably has something to do with the fact that this merge went so well. Would you say that?
Yes.
You connect with people so well.
Oh, yeah. Well, I don't know if
I'm going to speak very highly of you.
well,
You're connecting with people in such a great way.
Well, I love my church. My church is part of Eastside, and Eastside is now our church, but but my church is expanded, because it's included so many, and of course I have such history with Eastside that it's like, I have parents and grandparents there spiritually, so it's home for me, but my church, most of them did not have that history. But what was funny is when we remerged, a lot of them walked around and they told me, they go, now we get why we were the way we are. Because they saw the acorn didn't fall very far from the tree, culture-wise, DNA-wise.
Was Gene there before, or did he come later?
He came later. He's only been at Eastside for 11 years ago. But he was a preaching intern.
Okay.
Back when he was in college.
But the DNA is it's very similar.
Oh yeah.
Okay.
He was kind of, everybody was cheering when our pastor retired. We loved Greg and Jessup at Eastside, and they brought Gene, was kind of like the Eastside son. Is how they look at him.
There's so much here, because the way that you transferred leadership, the way that you assimilated these different groups together, there's a lot of really cool stories that we're not going to talk about. Let's talk about just assimilation. So what is assimilation?
Well, assimilation is the journey that a first-time guest takes to become a connected serving member. So it's turning a first-time guest into a connected serving member. Connected, that's measurable. Connected means in a small group, or if you're a traditional church, a Sunday school class, or if you're still from the secret days of the Wednesday believer service, midweek thing, whatever your community is, you can measure how many of those are ending up in that.
Yeah.
And then connected serving means that they're volunteering, and member means that whatever your church does or doesn't do, where people say that this is my church, that they've experienced that and done that. So it's that journey of a first-time guest to becoming a connected serving member.
Yeah, and I think every church wants to be good at this, at least in theory. And so someone walks off the street, comes into the church building. You want to say, we're really good at making people feel at home and connected, but we've been to enough services and enough churches to know that not everyone is good at this. So sorry, we've seen too much.
Yeah.
Why is this so important for an organization?
Because a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. And we keep doing outreach events to grow a church. Man, we need to grow, we need to impact the community. So we plant these bushes called outreach events, and birds gather in them, but then they leave, because a bird in those bushes...
It's the back door. You never close that back door.
Well, they don't even, it's an outreach event, whether it's on your church campus or outside in the community, the birds gather, but then they go, because they're the mindset of a bird, to keep the metaphor intact, at an outreach event is different than a person who shows up at your church, the bird in the hand, that come every week. I don't care how big your church is. You have guests just about, if not every single week. Those people are there because they're going through something, and it's made them open to God, and they Googled and picked your church to go visit. That's different than some bird at an outreach concert or whatever else. And they picked your church. You think your chances of connecting with them are better?
You would think.
Yeah, well, they are. Whether you do it or not is the next, is the matter of something I'm sure we'll talk about.
Yeah.
Or they have been prayed for by somebody in your church for years. And it was, for some reason, now they said yes to the invitation. So they come to you pre-connected. The bird's out. I talk to churches all the time that have successful outreach events, 3 and 4 a year. And their church has grown goose egg every year. Because they don't know that a bird in the hand is worth 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100 out in the bush. Because these are much more easy to connect. And I always ask this question, and it gives me a little shiver. What father would keep giving an allowance to a kid who lost it every week? And I feel like that's most of our churches. And in fairness to our churches, this is a new thing. I wouldn't be doing assimilation, and I wouldn't be focusing on this a couple generations ago, or a generation ago even maybe. So much has changed. It used to be that you grew up in church and you grew up in communities, and your brand of church, you knew how you connected, and when you went from one community to another or one state to another, you knew how to do what your group does, and that's how you assimilate. All of that's gone.
Right.
And it's actually, we can mourn it or we can get excited about it. But whatever it is, we need a plan for connecting people because that whole mainframe and cultural setup is gone out there. So we have to get great and intentionally connecting people.
Yeah, and there is a large group out there that thinks because we have church, people should be there, and people should love it, and people should come back and be there every single week. And that's just not how it is. So now we have to think strategically through assimilation. How are we connecting people to our church and they'd actually want to be there week after week? So let me ask you that. What are some of those key organizational things that you do that make assimilation so good for Eastside?
And I'll take it beyond Eastside because Gene gave me a blank slate. Because there was no such thing as an assimilation person at Eastside when I came. So he gave me pretty much a blank canvas, and I created this thing that we did, and we just started doing it. And nobody was more shocked after a year what the results were. We ended up with we had about 1,900 plus guest cards come in that year, our first year at the new building.
So 1,900 people came in and filled out a card.
Yes.
So this should be easy people, right?
There it is. And so by the end of the first year with the strategy that we built, we had 1 out of 3 of them baptized, 1 out of 4 got in a small group, 1 out of 7 became a volunteer, and 1 out of 14 went on a global trip, because that's a big thing.
That is a big thing.
And then 1 out of 20 became a leader. So we bested some of those stats, and we moved back and forth based on all kinds of factors, but we tracked that.
Right.
So I started, because of those results, because of that first year, we ended up in I think we were the 11th fastest growing church. That Outreach Magazine publishes those top 100 or whatever. And so we started getting calls. Gene, how do you get them there? Greg, how do you keep them there?
What are you doing with this card that's
Exactly.
so magical?
So when it just felt weird to say, well, specifically, this is what we do, knowing that, is that really going to transfer to a church of that stripe in that community or in that place in the world? And then I started getting phone calls to the degree that I ended up making a website that is, the title of it, it's called Climbing the Assimilayans. It's greatcurtis-assimilation.com is the URL, but Climbing the Assimilayans was on a fluke because those stats I know, because after the first year we report on those to the staff. And do you remember Prezi?
No.
Prezi was, like Keynote or Power, but it was a moving, like you would report and it would move around. So it was really trendy back then. And they had a template that was Mount Everest. And
so you call it Climbing the Assimilation?
Climbing the Assimilayans. Because they had a Mount Everest template that I borrowed from, and the summit was your goal. And then you had camps along the way that represented the different stats. So I thought this is a great way to explain this to the staff.
Perfect.
So I did it, and then this thing flies out of my mouth. They said, so basically we're all Sherpas helping people make the climb to full connection. We're helping them climb the Assimilayans. And it got a stupid, almost, I thought it was kind of a dad joke, but it got a hard laugh.
Okay.
And amongst millennials, they were into it the most. So I ended up creating this thing called Climbing the Assimilayans, where the idea that people who are in connection ministry are Sherpas, because for guests, we think as church people, connecting is a coast, but it's really a climb. And it always will be. And it requires a Sherpa who is a waymaker to help them reach that summit of full connection.
I like this.
Yeah, the idea of climbing the Assimilayans is that we're Sherpas and all that kind of thing, and I'm losing my question here. I'm so excited about what
I want to know those steps. What
are
those
steps? Yeah, so here's what I was saying. So I make this website so that people can, with every little learning, so that I cannot have as long of a conversation that we're enjoying right now. You know what I mean? And just send links and whatever.
Yeah.
And then as I did it, I started having times where I've worked with churches now from as small as 30 people to as big as 22,000 in 7 different countries on 5 continents. I mean, and I've had to ask myself this question. I love, as a strategist in my Strength Finder, what are the universal principles of an assimilation strategy that works? Okay. And I came up with this with a little alliteration to make it easy. The four things that I'm seeing work right now that are universal are, I'm going to call it 1 place, 1 program, 2 processes, 2 placements. This is a strategy for connection. So the first, which is becoming more and more common in a lot of churches, though not all, is one place that you send your guests. You don't send them to anywhere, and you don't ask them to do anything but
Like a
one place to
guest
get their
central-
contact. Yes.
Guest central location. Okay.
I always say they're not your girlfriend till you got her phone number, and they're not your guest till you got their contact info.
Even though you have multiple doors, you have to send them to one place.
No, that's confusing. It's one thing, Guest Central. We might have different expressions of it all over, but you're going to Guest Central to exchange your contact info for hospitality.
Okay. So you can have multiple ones.
Yes,
but
yes.
The idea is the same.
But we're not going to send you to the Welcome Center and Guest Central for the gift, or the info counter to ask about this, or we're not going to ask you to register for our women's retreat or our men's conference or anything. We want one ask. You only get one ask, because if you give a guest multiple choice, they will always pick D, none of the above.
Right.
And all of us are like that when we're in a new environment.
Let me ask you something. Are you always thinking about a guest every week?
Yes.
So what about the person that's come back 20 times and they want to know about the women's retreat? They got to go to the website?
No, that's the one program. You set me up so good. Okay, so one place to the second is one program. At that one place, not only do you get a free gift, and we get your contact information, but you're also told about our one program. Ours is called Next Steps. Super not creative. I know everybody calls theirs Next Steps, but it is what it is, and it works good for guests.
Yeah.
So they tell you about Next Steps. We've even found that if they walk them over to our Next Steps room, 50% of them will stay for it.
Really?
Which is really neat. But the Guest Central team knows their job is not just to make them feel welcome and take their contact information. It's to point to the one program, which is the next phase in strategy. And the one program is the answer to every question. So we have an info counter at Eastside. There is absolutely no info on it, and no info is allowed, because the answer to every question is Next Steps. So in other words, how do I find out what the church believes? Go to Next Steps. How do I get to know?
Next Steps a class?
No, and that would be a very bad word in our context.
Okay, all right.
I'll tell you why in a minute. But we just tell everybody, how do I find a small group? How do I find out what they have for women here? How do I find out what they have for men here? How do I?
Yeah.
Everything but where's the restroom and I need a medic. The answer is Next Steps.
Well, what is Next Steps?
Okay, so Next Steps is not a class,
Okay.
because guests know that our classes are the church's version of a timeshare presentation, and they're just not into it.
Right.
And what you need to do, our classes have focused historically on things like, here's our church's heritage, here's our statement of faith, and they don't care. They do not care. What guests want to know, if they've come more than once, the 3-time is the goal thing, is how do I connect here? So you want to not tell them what you want them to know, you want to tell them what they want to know. So what we do is we create, instead of telling them what the Bible has to say about connection in a church context, you just create an environment where they connect. Okay, so we call it just Next Steps or the Next Steps experience, but we know, our announcers, they know you never use the word class, and we deliver on that. When you come, you get a backpack. Because following Jesus with us is an adventure, it's a journey, and you're going to get a new piece of equipment for the 4 steps that we're going to train you in following Jesus alongside of us here at Eastside. You're going to be sitting at tables. Tables is huge in the announcement, because that means not in rows listening to a lecture. And we have somebody matchmaking. They don't know. They go sit at table number 2, but what they don't know is table number 2 is all young adults, or table number 3 is all empty nesters.
So this non-class is a room with tables.
There's
often?
snacks, and it's every weekend. And so we run it.
Every week.
We're borrowing right now. We had to go from a 7-week quarterly expression to, we were growing so fast, we borrowed the husk of the growth track at Birmingham. At Church of the Highlands. The husk meaning just the container, which is, step 1 is always the first weekend, step 2 is always the second weekend, and it's 4 weekends. If there's a 5th weekend, we get it off, right? So if you miss one, you can jump into the one you missed the following month. But it's always happening, and you can start and stop at any time. It works.
So Next Steps is literally 4 steps,
Mm-hmm.
and then each week is a new one.
Yeah.
So if someone's new, can they jump in at 2 or 3? Or
Yes,
that's a
they
week,
could.
or?
No.
Okay.
We tell them about one because I think it feels like, for instance, step 3, we teach them about their shape for service, and then we take them on an all-access tour behind the scenes. That's our number 1 rated week. But if that's your first week, what we've learned, that's kind of like meeting the parents on the first date.
Right.
And so you'll have less of a percentage actually end up on a team if week 3 is their first. So you can jump in any time, but we always say step 1 starts at the first weekend of the month. So What that is though is we promise them faith, fun, and friends. They're going to grow in their faith. They're going to make friends at these tables with some coffee and snacks. There's great discussion. There's great training from up front. Moves out from video to training to games and competitions that reinforce the training. And they get prizes as a table if they win. And if somebody wins, everybody at the table gets the prize. So it provides camaraderie and connection. Back when we did the quarterly expression, we would launch 1/3 to 2/3 of those tables as small groups at the end. Now, because they come in all the time, we can't do that. We have another way of doing that now. But it's...
so you went to Guest Central, then you went to Next Steps.
One place to our one program, and by virtue of being in the one program, you automatically get into our two processes, which the two are small group placement process and volunteer placement process. That's the really elegant one that we don't have time for, but that deserves the
What was your website in case they want to go further?
The URL is gregcurtis-assimilation.com, and it's called Climbing the Assimilayans if you Google it.
Okay, so if you want to go further with that, check that out. And then what was the last one?
The last part of the strategy is two placements, which is a group and a team. So in our context, it could be a Sunday school class in yours if it's a traditional church or whatever. But if you're small group based, then it's getting them in a small group and a ministry team. So that's the goal. That's the scoreboard. Attendance at Next Steps is a scorecard. But the scoreboard is people in a group and a team. I have now come to believe, I was doing some work with churches in South America in the summer, and they really exposed this to me, that I've come to believe that it's probably, and this is going to sound like heretical, that's more important to get people in a group and a team than it is to get them to become a Christian at the early stages. Because millennials and Gen Zs, many of them will not come to faith unless they experience belonging and the one another's in a context of community like a small group, and or what happens when people serve one another in Jesus' name in ministry. And when they get to play, as long as you have, I recommend a church have 20% of their volunteer positions that a Buddhist or an atheist could do. And we have that, and they do, believe it or not. But Muslims in those positions, all that kind of stuff, so that they're not positions where they're, teaching or saying, follow me, I got it all figured out about Jesus yet, but it's just, they get to serve and be on teams and see things, local compassion and other things at our facility and in our worship service, even tech team and all that. And so if you have that, millennials and Gen Zs are transformed a little differently than people in my generation. In my generation, we were transformed from the head, we heard a message and teaching, and we formed some new convictions, then it went to our heart, and then it went to our hands, and we started doing things differently. But millennials and Gen Zs, they start with their hands. And then after doing that and seeing what happens, whether it's the one another's, a small group, or serving others, Jesus, then it moves to their heart. And then as it ignites their passion, they start to form new convictions and beliefs. And so it works the reverse. So if we're going to make it with the next generation as a church, we've got some people will become Christians because they were in a group or a team. So I think priority one is connecting people for churches and getting them in some kind of a community cell group, and even probably a skosh more important is getting them serving.
Do you do any kind of covenant or partnership or something like that?
No, we do, like I always tell them, well, that's what I tell them about belonging, and I love this. I'll ask in Next Steps, and I don't really teach anymore. I have different people doing it on all the campuses, but it's in the script. The hosts do it. They'll ask this question. I love this moment. When does a baby belong to your family? And somebody will blurt out in the room at one of the tables, well, as soon as they're born. And then I just wait. And then somebody will say, oh, when they're conceived. And I said, I think you're right. Here's why. Because before they're ever born, we're throwing parties called showers, and people are bringing gifts for the little king or queen of Siam, and we're morphing a nursery, and building a nursery decorated for them. And now there's gender reveal parties. I mean, all this is between conception and birth, right? Why does that happen? Because God put it on the DNA of a parent that a baby who belongs well will grow well, and a child who grows well will serve itself and others well. Well, what would you call a family then that withheld belonging until the baby believed what the parents wanted them to believe, and they behaved like the parents wanted them to behave?
Well, you've never heard a church do that, right?
That's what I say. I go, you know what I call it? A church. I call it a church. And I said, here's the thing. God expects his family to run like your family does, because he created the family and he created the church. And I said, if a baby belongs to a family before they're born, then a guest belongs to your church before they're even born again.
Okay, so they don't have to be the perfect Christian before we allow them to be a partner.
Correct. And let me. I know some churches use partner, some use member, some don't have anything.
Yeah.
So let me put it just in my terms.
Yeah.
Is the terms that we use, just because it's easy.
I'm being
for
a
me.
little facetious because it does bother me that we have that kind of language.
Because
But I
it's
agree
us
with
them.
you. Yeah, I agree.
We don't want us them. So you could treat a guest like they belong because they're in gestation, and you'll never meet a guest that Jesus didn't die for. You'll never meet a guest that I don't believe the Holy Spirit didn't draw to your campus.
Right.
For
They're
a
already
purpose.
children of
So
God.
why figure out, did the birth happen, or are they still gestate? They belong. And in a family, the 3-year-old belongs as much as the 16-year-old, but only the 16-year-old gets the keys to the car. So we just need to don't be afraid. The 3-year-old belongs as much as the 16-year-old, and the preborn one does too, but you just don't give them the same level of responsibility, because that would be derelict in bad leadership or parenting, right?
So let me ask you this. Because I have read a lot on making covenants and things and signing things makes it, you feel a little bit more like you have ownership. Is there any of that process?
Yes, and I agree.
Okay.
I agree. So this is what we do. So I'll say this has affected our concept of membership. So Acts 2:47 says, and I read it, the Lord added to their number daily those who are being saved. So I said, so who adds to the church? And they all go, the Lord. And I go, you know what that means? Gene Apple can't make you a member of Eastside. I can't make you a member of Eastside, and you can't make you a member of Eastside. The truth is, God makes you a member of Eastside, and because he does that, the reality may be that because you're at Next Steps, the majority of you, this has already happened. So on week 4, step 4, you won't get a membership application. I've worked with many churches where you apply and you have to be met with by the elder board and okayed. And in some churches, the elder boards are so busy they never get around to it. So what does that say? I said it won't be a membership covenant or commitment that I promise I will believe these things and do these things so that I can be a member in good standing. What it will be is a membership declaration, which says, I believe that God has added me to this church to experience all these things, even though I may have only experienced half of them so far. And then I tell them, we'll take that membership declaration. There's no obligation to sign, but if you do, we'll take it, we'll code you as a member of our database. And you know what membership gets you at Eastside? 0. Zip, nothing. And they all laughed, I get you nothing. Why? Because you belong when you walked in the door. So then, Greg, why do we go through this?
Yeah, what's this for?
This is why. Because you will build community differently with us if you understand that God brought you here instead of your preferences were served. You like the kids ministry, the teaching's fun, the worship's jamming, or it's located closer than another church. You're here because God, and we teach them in week 3, I said, we're going to tell you next week the reasons why you're really here. And we do this thing where we say, so raise your hand if you're here because of Gene's teaching. And a bunch of people raise your hand if it's the worship. Raise your hand if it's the kids. And I said, here's the truth. None of you are here for any of those reasons. Those are just a hook God used to get you here.
Yeah.
You're only here for one or more of 3 reasons. Reason number 1, somebody here is going to go through a valley, and you're part of how they're going to get through it, and he had to bring you into community first. Reason number 2, you're going to go through a valley, and there's a group of people here who are going to make sure you get through it well, and he had to bring you into community first. Reason number 3, you plus another group of people are going to result in an extension of the influence of Jesus in the community or the world. Okay? That's all God cares about. You, others, Jesus. He could care less whether you like Gene's teaching, whether you like the worship, whether the kids program is, he could care less about where it's located. All he cares about is you, others, and Jesus. So that's why you're here. And then we bring them through a process of discovering their shape, take them on an all-access tour. The week 4 is all about what people like Eastsiders do locally and globally to change the world. And they realize that they're here for a kingdom reason, which means that if we don't do that, that's what our process of having them declare that God has added me to this church for these reasons, right?
Right.
Even though I haven't experienced all of them yet. That's different than, if you don't do that, if you don't have a way of doing that, it doesn't have to be that way. But if you don't do something like that, it's people's preferences, and as soon as what they prefer change, they're free to go.
Right.
But this says it's bigger. And that's frankly, knock on wood, you never want to take this for granted, but Eastside is, it's getting close to 60 years old. but Eastside has been a healthy place, partly because it's always been a Matthew 6:33 church, the kingdom first, not our preferences. So our old people, even though they, probably put in their earplugs at the beginning, all they do is cry because they see young people's hands are lifted and the place exploding, right? Because they're kingdom people.
Yeah.
I was raised at Eastside. If you ask me what's your perfect worship service, I couldn't tell you because I've lived outside of my preferences all my life because I was taught to follow Jesus for his kingdom, not for me. So I couldn't even tell you. And most of our churches like that. And so because of it, in the 60 years, again, knock on wood, we've never had a church split. We've never had a scandal. It's just been a healthy place.
Let me ask you this. For those that are watching, they've heard a lot of programs. They've heard a lot of people. Let's say a smaller church is watching it and they want to have great assimilation, but they don't have the time of like having an assimilation pastor. They're trying to figure out how they can even manage all of this. What would be like 3 things that they could do that would just make it a little bit better? Say it's a church of 100 or something and they just can't handle quite what you're saying. Or maybe they can, but they just need some first baby steps. What would you say that would be?
Well, let me say first, remember, I'll give you 3 things. The first, and hopefully I'll remember all of them by the time. The first is, remember that assimilation is not another ministry.
Right.
It is a strategy that every ministry uses to connect people.
I like that.
So picture the ministries, if the church is a body, like different organs. We think of assimilation, we need to add a new organ. No, it's the circulatory system or another system that nourishes all the organs. Pumping new volunteers to them and connecting them every month, at least in our context. So everybody went. So it's somebody does need to manage, just like there's a part of your brain that manages those processes. So you do have to have leadership doing that, but it's not the same as just starting a whole other department or ministry.
And I'm really glad you said that, and I hope everyone heard that has to be a DNA lifeblood of who you are. If you're just going to add this as a program and try and implement everything he said throughout this whole 30 minutes, that won't be as effective as it being your DNA. So that's really good. All right.
So that's the first one. The second one, because you said, where do you start? With some simple things. When I mentioned that the 4 pieces are a 1 place, 1 program, 2 processes, and 2 placements. And parenthetically, by the way, I said this works regardless of culture and size. I've seen churches in South America out in the compost that they give because it's the best coffee in the world down there. That in Africa too, but you get a free cup of coffee, and or a baked good or something, is what they exchange for their contact info. And their contact info isn't on a card, because I've seen this out in Africa. It'll be your text, because they leaped over the industrial age into technological age, and they all have text and they use that. So it's amazing that what I see happening, And by the way, there's these churches in South America that were just. They were just kind of stuck in their attendance for quite a many years. Great outreach, great people. But when they started doing these 4 things, the implementing churches in 1 year grew by 32% and had to add services. And they've been just stuck there. But what I always tell them is, if you want to know what to do first, start with the order that I gave it. You start with the thing you don't have. So if you don't have a place where you're getting their contact info for free, start there.
Yeah.
If you don't have an environment, you can call it a program, but not a class, but an environment where people can make those connections and get into that process to find out.
That's the one most.
Then do that one.
Yeah.
If some people have those 2, or they can flip this around and change the environment to make it more connectable. Then then they just need a better process. Most of the time, it's the volunteer placement process. Then that's what they give attention to. You know what I'm saying? You go in order. You just start the one that you do, like that.
Do you have just one person in charge of the cards and following up to make sure everyone's there? Well, you're a little bit larger, but someone's following up with the information that they're given.
Well, in a small church, that would be you get 5 guest cards from the previous Sunday. You just have a volunteer even that enters them in to the database, and they get an email from the pastor that's already been pre-written that invites them to the 1 program.
Okay.
And you can do anything else with that in a small church you want. You can text them, you can call them, the pastor can call. You can do whatever you want.
Right.
But at least that.
So you guys just send an email, there's not a phone call or something?
No.
Okay.
It's an email, but we do at the 1 place, at the end, every team member writes a handwritten postcard.
At the table that they were at?
At the 1 place at Guest Central. Oh. So what they do is, before they leave, they write we have postcards that are actually redeemable for a specialty gift at our cafe or at our smaller campuses, another gift of some kind, you know. And it was so nice to meet you, praying for your mom's surgery, you know, if they found out something personal. And please use this to, you know, and that encourages a second time visit. And in our case, when they redeem it, that tracks second time visits automatically. Right. And then we drop those in a name, and then usually the pastor or somebody will text or call, you know, our campus pastor, maybe the second time visits, right? Because the goal is third time visit. And everything, like a lazy river, all the jets are pointing in the same direction. So you're just, you know, next steps is it's all good at them there. So you said, what can you do? Number one was, remember that assimilation is a strategy. It's not a whole new ministry like the other ones. Second, you start with the 4 P's, the 1 P on the left that you don't have. Okay. The third, and this will be a little self-promoting. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Is that all right?
It's totally fine.
The third thing, especially if you're a small church, I have a video course. It's not very expensive. It's in the 200s, and you can get it on my website. And it's meant to go through with your team. You can do it like an online college course, but it's 25 to 45 minutes for 6 sessions, and it gives you stuff to talk about with your team and process till you have it all built. And it gives you all, I mean, it goes so in depth into all this stuff. And I would recommend you could do it as a retreat with your staff or volunteer staff, or you could do it almost like a small group for 6 weeks. And there's been churches in New Zealand that are launching that have used the video course to help them launch, you know, well. There's the second thing is having, and I've even had some small churches do that. I had a church of 300 too that I just did recently, where I come out and do what's called a base camp, and naturally that costs a little more, but that's on my website too. And I spend 2 days with the staff, from senior pastor all the way down to admins and key volunteers. I had one church of 100 have me do it. Church of 100 for 10 years is now almost 300, and it's been a year. A year. That's 300% growth with assimilation, not outreach.
I love it.
Connecting.
I think it's so important. In fact, I'm glad you're self-promoting it, because it should be more than a 30-minute video.
Well, that probably was already.
It needs to be something that you're taking very seriously. It should be a part of who you are as a church, and you need to spend time and money on this part of your church. It's as important as any other aspect of your church. So, Greg Curtis, I want to thank you for being here today. Really appreciate this guy. Follow up. We'll put some of the links below that you can follow up as well. This has been Team Performance Coaching. Thank you for being here. Thank you for watching.